Sounds good.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Thrive by Nutrition podcast. Today we have Monica Salafia with us. She is a registered dietitian, a certified personal trainer. She's extremely knowledgeable in sports nutrition, lifestyle nutrition, general fitness nutrition, kind of you name it. She's like the jack of all trades, basically. Super excited to have her on, though. I've been following her for probably close to 2 years now, maybe. She puts out really good content, especially on Instagram. She's very creative, and I'm going to let her take the floor now and just kind of go through her kind of journey on how she got into being an RD when she figured out she wanted to be an RD, and just a little bit more about herself.
Well, thanks, Joey. And yeah, I think that it was around 2 years ago. And we had just talked about, like, I had a little podcast going. So I was really just starting the whole social media thing in my dietetics career. I did not know that social media would be such a part of being a registered dietitian these days, as when I first started. So I think for me, I guess I just want to start off with the beginning, the part of my journey where I first had my aha moment of this is what I want to do. And honestly, it was fitness. Fitness was the launch pad into my nutrition journey, because when I was in high school, I had already been playing sports in school. I've always been athletic as a kid, and I really liked the team sport aspect. But what I really loved was the weightlifting and conditioning part before that. So I had played soccer, I swam, I played lacrosse. I really liked being involved in the team sport thing. But like I said, that weight room part was my favorite. And my big brothers, I have two of them, they were doing powerlifting. So it was 15 years old, sophomore in high school.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm a girl. I got body issue things and reading all these women's health magazines. They've gotten a lot better these days. But I was being really active. I was lifting weights in the gym with my brothers on Mondays and Wednesdays, doing yoga and stuff with my mom. But when I was getting this nutrition information, I was adopting some of those practices that weren't that great for my body. I tell this story a lot because I think it's important.
Yeah.
When I was doing a heavy bench press, I nearly passed out because, admittedly, I just did not feel my body properly. However, in my defense, I didn't really know I wasn't doing the right thing because I was just doing what I thought was good for me. And I think that so many people do the same thing. They go on the internet, they are on Instagram, and they see all this information and they're like, oh, she's doing it, it's going to work for me. But of course, we know, as dietitians, we're kind of facing the fad diet industry versus nutrition science.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm 15 years old. I just want to be strong in the gym. I thought I was cool because this was a time when weightlifting for women, women have always been in the gym, but put it this way, there was no boom of workout clothes for women at this time. I remember flipping through TJ Maxx racks looking for something. Now it's there's an entire fitness section. So it was still pretty new, women weightlifting, and just the information was not geared towards how to feel your body. So I'm 15, bench pressing, nearly pass out, and then I come back to life, and the trainer, his name's Sebastian, he was like, did you eat before you came? And I was like, no, not really. Truthfully, I was probably doing super low carb. And he's like, don't pull that again. You have to eat before you come here. And he made me drink a Gatorade, eat a Snickers. And so that was kind of my first nutrition lesson. You have to eat before you work out.
Yeah.
It's also super big piece of humble pie to fail a bench in front of your big brothers. If there's any little sisters listening to this podcast, you know how it is to have big brothers and you want to impress them and you're just ugh. So it was super embarrassing. I felt really weak. I felt really crappy. And then that was when I was like, okay, if I want to do this for my life, because I love this, idea of being fit, then I need to learn how to nourish my body. So I decided right then and there that I'm going to buy the book Nutrition for Dummies and just learn the basics of nutrition, because I didn't know anything. I knew healthy fruits and vegetables, that kind of thing, but not the why behind it. And so once I bought that book, I just knew that that was the framework of what I wanted to study. And I was also taking health class in high school. and I thought I wanted to be a sex educator, and decided that, I mean, that's still a cool topic, but what it was for me was the education piece.
Mm-hmm.
So then that turned into, okay, maybe I want to be a gym teacher, maybe I want to be a yoga instructor and own my own business. So all those little pieces kind of led up to me going, aha, wait a second, I need to learn what to do in college that lets me study nutrition and fitness. I don't know what that is though, because I've never heard of that. So
Yeah.
I decided that I just was going to go to college for nutrition. And then in my college class, that's when I did research, legit, like a research project set me up for my next steps, which was becoming a registered dietitian, because I didn't know what that was. And you may have seen this in your classes, but did any of your like student or friends not know what a registered dietitian was, but they were in your program?
Like in college? Or
Yeah, when I was a junior in college, there were freshman girls in my program that
yeah.
did not know what an internship was.
You mean like, so it was before you were actually in the nutrition program? There were
Yeah,
people?
so they were like freshmen and like elective courses, and then they were like, I
Gotcha.
want to go to school for nutrition, but
Yeah.
I didn't know it was to become a registered dietitian.
Yeah. Definitely.
I
Oh,
didn't
100%. I think there's so many people who have no idea like what a registered dietitian actually is. They think it's just like a nutritionist, just a general person who's knowledgeable about foods, but they don't know like all of the schooling that is required to actually do that.
Yeah, like there's steps. It's like
Yeah.
you go to college, but it can't just be any college doing nutrition. It
Yeah.
has to be the didactic program in dietetics, and you have to do that to become eligible for an internship. And then there were people who were like, well, what's an internship? So I was lucky enough slash curious enough to make that my mission, to learn if I want to do fitness and nutrition, what is that? What is that? Do I become a like a sports medicine doctor? Like, I don't know. And then I was like, oh, you become a registered dietitian. And then boom, that set me on my trajectory. I ended up going to a 4-year college and was really just loving everything that I studied. And then that is kind of what led me to Denver, because in a way, my mission was to become a sports dietitian, but
Mhm.
my area was not like for sports. So I was in my internship, and then eventually was like, if I'm not getting the sports nutrition experience here, maybe I look elsewhere. So I did some research, found a preceptor in Denver who was Dr. Todd Weber. If anyone looks him up, some people probably know him. And he had Energy Balance Nutrition Consulting, was looking for a dietetic intern who did blogging, was interested in sports and writing and things like that. And I was like, check, check, check.
Yeah.
This is for me. So my, I was just like, okay, I've made it this far, got to keep going. So then I reached out to my directors and I was like, hey, if I find a preceptor in Denver, can I move during my internship to get that for my community rotation? And she was like, absolutely. Like, if you do the work, just send us the information and we'll make it happen. So thank goodness my entrepreneurial side kicked in. And I was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to figure out how to do this. So by May of 2016, I was almost done with my internship. This was the last bit of my rotation, and I moved and did gym workshops. I did blogging. I did pretty much everything that I am doing now, just as an
Mhm.
intern, and met the right people and just started building a little Denver fitness network. And it's been a wild ride ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit about the beginning of my journey, how I got to where I am now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's really cool. There's a lot of really good pieces of information in there. I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned was just how you were trying to, like, you thought you were doing everything you were supposed to, get your nutrition on point for your training, and you just were doing the wrong things, but you had no idea. And I think a lot of people are doing that. They're taking the initiative and they're looking at things on the internet and they think they're doing what they should be to fuel their bodies. But there's just so much misinformation out there, like you mentioned, where they end up going down kind of the wrong path. Um, so I think that's extremely important to kind of highlight. I think knowledge is lacking, and I think you do a really good job at putting out really simple and easy to digest information that like the average person could definitely read and understand and implement. So
Oh, that's really cool to hear. I will say that that's why I feel like I just teach nutrition.
Uh,
Whenever people ask me, like, what kind of diet program are you going to give me? And I'm like, I'm more of like a teacher. I'm
yeah.
like here to educate you on what I know, not keep anything from you. I'm going to tell you all the science you need to know, anatomy, physiology, whatever. You ask me the questions, I will give you that
Hmm.
info, and then we'll try and work on a way to apply it to your life, because there isn't like, there's no good food or bad food. There's no like right way or wrong way. Here's a nutrition science.
Yeah.
Here's your life. How do we make it work best for you? And that's kind of why I think I love what I do, is because I can kind of take that information that I can nerd out about, but then package it in a little easy, fun, hey, this is like how to set up a plate type of
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No.
Siri is turned on.
Yeah. It happens to me all the time. So,
Oh,
um,
weird. She's always listening.
yeah, it's
Anyways,
kind of creepy, honestly. That could go down to a whole different conversation. But, uh,
speaking of the
so
internet.
yeah. Yeah, that was kind of my situation where I was in. I would say around like 2012, even like 4 years before that, from like 20 or 2008 to 2012 ish. I was trying to make changes to my nutrition, and I just had no idea like that I was doing it wrong. And that was kind of like the piece that really just changed my results drastically, was just the knowledge that I gained from learning more about it. And when you learn like actual knowledge and like principles and concepts, and you can apply that to any situation that you're in. So like maybe you're at home and it's super easy to, put protein, carbs, whatever together here. But then when you're out to eat or something, you can still apply that knowledge you have to that. So I think that's kind of cool that you mentioned that like people are expecting like a meal plan, but what they get more is a lot of education on how to apply those principles to whatever situation they're in.
Oh yeah, it's like, I feel the cookie cutter method, we all know it doesn't work,
Yeah.
but that's, I feel like that we know it doesn't work. There's a ton of people who are very much like, give me that, follow that guide to follow that step
Mhm.
by step. And if they follow it, it's cool, that'll work. But people end up getting sick of things. A life situation happens that totally rocks people's world. Like, what are people doing now on a meal plan that doesn't, it's foods that they can't get, it sets people up
Yeah.
for failure. So yeah, I think that when you have an understanding of even just the basics of nutrition, I think, because that's where I started, right? Nutrition for Dummies. But so many people skip that step and just go right to something very extreme. I hate picking on one diet, but I'm going to the ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
We know a lot of the clinical benefits of it, right? We had to study it for very certain reasons. But when it gets thrown out there into like a public sphere and people read it and they're like, oh, okay, it's almost like they can't ask the questions why that
Mhm.
may not work, because they don't know. And you don't know what you don't know. So it's, I think, really important for us as dietitians to just educate, 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 not as much as possible. Even the basics, like the basics. What are carbs? What are fats? What are proteins? Because
Yeah.
there's still so many people who just don't learn that because that's not their craft. So I
Yeah.
think the sooner we get that message out, the better.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good reminder too, that we need to focus on the basics a lot too, because I think with, you being a registered dietitian, me being a dietetic intern, going through all this schooling, we're surrounded by so many people who are very knowledgeable in nutrition, and they know all of these basics that we've learned and we talk about in every single course, every single experience we have basically. Um, but like just simple things like what is a carb, like what foods have carbs in them. There's so much of the general population that they just don't really know. They haven't like looked into that stuff. And I think it's easy for us to forget that and kind of
Mhm.
pass through that. Where we'll say like, okay, include, a carb for each meal, and they don't even know what a carb is. So how are they supposed to implement that?
Or it'll be something like, well, is fruit a carb? Yeah, it is. Is vegetable a carb? Yeah, it is. Well, isn't fruit bad? Like, and then you get down that rabbit hole. So if we keep things objective, which I love, I love talking about nutrition in a very objective way,
Yeah.
which, right now it kind of doesn't align so much with some of the things that are popular in nutrition being super objective, but I love the data. I love, like,
Hmm.
this is what it is because
Yeah.
of why, and then blending that in with some of the subjective stuff. But I think if we could just teach very specific and basic, it helps a lot of people. So that's, I think, why when I am in a gym setting or I am in a, like on TV or something, I try to send messages that are just very basic nutrition things. When people want to go a step above, that's when individual coaching kicks in. And it's like, okay, well, that's your specific situation. We need to talk individually. No big deal. That's what I do. That's why I got in this field. So very important.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so I guess, like, what kind of populations do you generally kind of work with? I know you talked a lot about kind of your fitness background. That's like your love, your passion. So do you work with like very beginners usually, or intermediates, advanced, or like have you ever worked with any like professional athletes or?
Yes. So uh, I guess you would say like my target audience, I do talk a lot to women who are in the fitness scene, whether they're a member at a group fitness studio in Denver, or there's somebody on Instagram that is following a lot of workout pages and they stumble upon like the hashtag fitness nutrition or Denver nutritionist. So your general fitness enthusiast to the person who's training seriously for like a half Ironman, all the way up to the professional athletes. So I was really lucky to start working with the Denver Nuggets in like fall. Everything was going great until COVID.
Oh
But
gosh.
so I was super lucky to be able to work with them, of them individually, like sit down. I can't really talk much about it, but I was able to, sit down and talk
Yeah.
about the breakfast that they have to eat that day and all those other fun things. So really getting to do more closely MNT, but in a very sports specific way because I do have access to really cool lab data. So yeah, I'd say that's like my audience is the person that's interested in fitness, and on the like more general level, it's probably like women in fitness, and
Mhm.
then up to the elite level, which is the Nuggets players. But yeah, it's a wide variety, but it's all sports pretty much. So that's
Yeah,
what I
it's
like.
definitely a huge variety, which is really cool actually. And I guess do you find yourself struggling to kind of make that switch then? Like if you were talking to someone on the Denver Nuggets, then like an hour later having to talk to a general population person or something. Is it hard to make that switch?
Mm,
Like
I mean,
mentally?
uh, it's not like it's mentally hard to make the switch in terms of the information I'm giving them, but it does just get hard in general to talk to people all day. I'll say that. Like
Yeah.
that like will be mentally exhausting. But then also I would say, because I always take every single approach very individually, it's not necessarily hard to get that information to the person. It's more so being a really good listener. So some days where I'm like more distracted, it can be harder. But if you're a good listener, then you're going to have a good session. And I think that the more you're just tuned in to that conversation, whoever it is, it can be anybody. It can be the one Nuggets player, or it can be like a group full of women at a bar studio. Like as long as you're just focused and listening, it's easy. But and also going back to, a lot of it just is about the basics. Like it really is. I have
Mhm.
very basic conversations about colors and antioxidants across all levels. So it,
Yeah.
yeah, it really does get that basic sometimes, which is nice.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And I know you mentioned that you can't really like talk a whole lot in detail about it, but um I guess my question would be like someone general population, you said you cover the basics. Like I think some people might think that professional athletes are doing these super advanced like I don't know, like nutrition manipulations like to optimize their performance. And I guess like how often do you really get to that advanced level, or is it still kind of the basics for most of them too?
Well, I will say this, because they are uh, they're an elite professional
Yeah.
athlete. This is their job. So they have to eat like an elite professional athlete. So to come up with a plan that meets their energy needs, that's the other thing. That I guess I would say that is a little bit of a challenge, to try and feed an athlete that needs that much food but healthy, happy calories. Like that's a struggle. And then also keeping them motivated, because they're just so focused on like their job, their task. It's like the food piece they know is important, but it's like, how important is it really? Whereas talking to, let's say, a mom who's a member at a group fitness studio, she has a lot more time to think about her nutrition. So I can say that, are there advanced nutrition practices in the sports, in the elite sports arena? Yes and no. We do get a lot more detailed because we can, and it's their job to. But that's not to say that we don't get like into the nitty gritty with the general population. It's just that we, one, don't have as many tools at our disposal, and two, the motivation isn't as high necessarily, because like I said, that's their job. Like, they need to perform, and if they're not, then people notice. So it can get more advanced. The other thing is too, that I didn't think I would be learning so much about, but I love, is like sweat rates. That's a lot more advanced. Like, I don't talk about sweat rates with my group fitness people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not measuring sweat and getting like that lab data. So that's definitely different. Yeah, I would say those are probably the biggest things. Oh, one more note on that.
Yeah.
They do have very different diets. So I have to be very aware of what they're choosing to nourish themselves with. However they label it, that's cool. Instead of talking to that general person who's maybe just curious about those diets, like, for example, vegan or keto, like, if this is what that person wants to do, then okay, I need to just optimize that. There's wiggle room, but there isn't like a educational piece. It's kind of like, okay, let me make this super optimal for you, which I guess is for everyone, but this is a little bit harder to answer than I thought it would be, but
Yeah. No, that's cool. So what are, I guess, one or two of the biggest struggles you kind of see in more like the beginner fitness realm? Like,
so your typical like person who's, I want to start working out, get in shape, eat healthy, like the biggest
yeah,
struggle there.
yes, yeah, someone who maybe they want to lose, 15 pounds or something, and they're just getting new. They're kind of, just got into maybe lifting weights, got a gym membership.
Yeah, the biggest struggle is, I'd say, focus and consistency, because there's always this new diet coming out. This trainer says that, my friend says this, I saw this on YouTube. So it's like, okay, rein it in. Like, but this is your plan. This is your journey. You've tried all those things, and that's what got you here. The other thing is, kind of a struggle, is I don't want to say lack of honesty, but a lot of people want to please their dietitian
Mm,
with a food log that they think they want to see. And I'm like, no, 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 no.
yeah.
Give me honesty. I promise you, I will not berate your food choices. I need to know what you're eating, so that way I can help you improve. Um, Alcohol is a good example to use, because people will like log like a cocktail and a beer, but really they had maybe 4 cocktails and like 3 beers, but they don't want to tell me that. So then it kind of gets hard to manipulate their next plan, because I didn't get accurate data. So that's why I'm like, we have to have this objective data. Just try to be accurate with
Mhm.
it. Try to be honest with me. And then it'll be easier for you to see results. So I'd say those are the two struggles: the focus and the honesty.
Yeah. No, I definitely think, I mean, both of those are huge. I could go on all of those. I think one thing about the whole honesty thing, is like, sometimes, when I'm working with somebody, I'll ask them to just track their normal intake, like you said, to get an idea of what they're normally eating. And I expect that week to just be probably a little more cleaned up than what their normal actual week is, because
Mhm.
they're just more conscious of it. The more conscious you are of
Yeah,
your food intake, it's probably going to improve. And then two, like you said, they don't want to look like they're eating too unhealthy, I guess you would say, compared to what they think our expectations are. um, so
exactly.
some of your clients, I know from your Instagram, it seems like you take very different approaches depending on the individual, which is really cool. Like, some people, you have them track their macros, and some people they don't. Um, so I guess, I don't know. I just want to learn more about like how many people would you say that you do have, like, percentage, if you even know of, that actually do track macros, and like, how do you adjust their plan if they are tracking versus they aren't tracking?
I would say it's probably like a 75-20, 25. Yeah, 75-25, maybe 70-30. I'm thinking about the people who give macro tracking a try, but end up
Mhm.
like not doing it the full week, but then try it again the next week. So that's why I'm like, 25-20.
Yeah.
But so let's say that like I'd say 75% are. And for them, it is pretty standard with the process, right? Like I use Nutritionix. That's my favorite app to use for clients. And when it's the day before their check-in, I just remind them like, hey, send me your logs. And then we manipulate their macros based on whatever results we saw or didn't see, or whatever training is coming up. So one example, I have a client who's training for a half Ironman, and we had been working together for, I think this is week 3. And she's very diligent with her macros and very diligent with her workouts, very intentional athlete. And so she is super compliant. And with her, what we look for is how is your performance and how is your hunger? Because we don't want her to be hungry during her workout. We don't want her to performance to slip. But we do need to, because she's going from a strength athlete to an endurance athlete training for a half Ironman, we have to increase her carbohydrates to that endurance athlete level, but we can't do that right away. So what I do is I say, send me your check-in sheet, send me your macros, your logs, and we have our coaching session. Based on that information, I make my next plan. So I actually sent her this plan this morning, and I give a rationale as to like why we're making these changes and how we're not exactly where the recommendations are, because there's a fine line between being evidence-based but then using clinical judgment, right? Like just because it says give this athlete 10 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight doesn't mean you give that to your client right away.
Yeah.
Like, geez, like clinical judgment, huge. But we're incrementally increasing. So that's my typical approach for my macro tracking clients. Now, my non-macro tracking clients, we talk so much about behaviors, and we might like track a goal in a sense. For example, like if we talk about having beer around the Super Bowl, and this, that person's like, I always tend to overdrink and then I overeat, but I'm not going to have her track her beers because she doesn't want to track. So that's not going to work for her. But she is going to be held accountable during her next check-in. So that conversation in and of itself is a way of tracking, which is why I'm a huge fan of weekly check-ins, and also why I like to do telehealth, because it's one thing to like write in an email, like, this is what I did, but it's one thing to be like,
Mhm.
hey, Monica, this is what I did this weekend. Yeah, so
Yeah.
people don't really want to like lie. And then the other method to have some sort of data to look at is I use Healthy and the photo food journal. Super easy for people to be like, I'm down with that. I'll take a picture of my food and then send it to me. I can, even from the photo, I can tell composition of meal. I can tell how many times they eat a day. I can tell ratios pretty well. I can tell mindfulness. And like if they're eating in front of their computer, I know that they were not super mindful. So there's a ton of information I can gather from the photo food journaling clients. I can just do more specific nutrition coaching or interventions with macro. So I kind of balance it like that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So when someone if they are like a macro client, do you have them like, is there a goal initially by the end of the program or however long you go? Is it a goal for them to kind of transition off of that? Or do you have a lot of people, they just kind of end it and they still just want to continue tracking as they go forward?
I feel like a lot of people will still continue to log a little bit, because so whenever I like finish with a person, I have a graduate, for example, we always do like a month check-in later, just to like catch up. It's not necessary that they track to show me, but a lot of them I find still do some days. It's just not an everyday or like 4 days, 5 days out of the week
Mhm.
sort of goal. For them, it's like, I didn't really track, but I did this one day just to see where I was at. It tends to become a behavior that, at least with my clients, becomes a very useful tool. They don't, I think I'm just going to say it. I'm good at coaching people on macros and not getting them obsessed with it. Like it's just,
Yeah.
I think it's because I just tell them what it is. It's just a tool to get objective data. And if it is triggering to you, like, we'll cut it out. But I think that we have enough conversation and, coaching where it doesn't ever really become an issue that they get obsessed with. And then a lot of times if they want to just stop, like, that's cool. They just stop, because I'm never trying to get people to track forever, but I am trying to get them to eat healthy forever. I will say that.
Yeah.
That behavior I am trying to make sustainable, but tracking isn't the way to do it. You have to stick to eating the food. So I would say that I would say that most people end up stopping tracking every day, but still have that behavior as a go-to when they want to put their mind on nutrition.
I like that. I like that little thing, phrase you put in there,
Yeah.
So with I guess tracking macros, like, I guess, what would you say to somebody who doesn't really want to start because they think it's way too much work? They think it's going to be way too stressful and take way too much time. Like, or like, what kind of advice would you give them? Like, specific advice, or I guess any pros that you would see for tracking versus not tracking?
Pros to tracking? Oh, heck yeah. I've got a whole pros and cons list of tracking in my Dietitian's Guide for Counting Macros book. But side note, I also have pros to intuitive eating if somebody wants to look into that. So what I would say, well, first I would ask, like, let's find the root cause of this angst against tracking. Did somebody have a history of doing it and it triggered an eating disorder? Did somebody have a history of doing it and it didn't work for them just because they maybe lacked the technology aptitude? Because I'll be honest, trackers are pretty much, they're fairly intuitive, but I've seen some real wonky things on people's food logs and in food logs in general that people just maybe not pick up. For example, I once had somebody log a chicken barbecue meal, and it had 220 grams of protein in that one meal.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, that's inaccurate. So that's my point of that is it a technology thing? Like, it's just too hard to do it, or I cook a lot, so I always have to find, like, what's the root cause. If we find the root cause and we ruled out the disordered eating patterns and we're clear on we can track, it's okay, then I say, let's just at least track your protein foods, assuming because I work in fitness, protein is actually, I find that even though I work with a lot of fitness female clients, protein tends to be lacking. It's either lacking or it's way too high. There's no like, oh, you nailed it. It's always like super high or super low. But anyways, I'll say just track the protein foods. Don't worry about the fats. Don't worry about the carbs, veggies, just like your basic sources of protein. Sometimes they don't know what that is. So then I teach them. I'm like, oh, these are our protein foods. So that would be like an example conversation that I might have with somebody who's a little bit hesitant about tracking macros. It's step number 1, find out the why. Step number 2, start with a really small step.
Yeah. No, that's good. So, I guess, like, what piece do you feel like tracking plays as far as like the education tool? Is it easier to educate clients when you are having them implement tracking versus when they're just doing more like the photo food log?
It's a little bit easier, I will say, and not even just for me, but for them, because then they can see not just the little details, but like the big picture. Because we're not just looking at like your day-to-day macros. We're looking at the big picture of, wow, you tracked 7 days. Let's look at this entire pattern. Let's look at all the behaviors that you have with that 7 days. So without that data, we don't necessarily have a full big picture to look at, in my opinion anyways. So I think that with macros in a tracker, you can see trends. One example I can tell you is if I have a food log and I'm seeing somebody's check-in sheet and they're reflecting hunger levels, well, I can easily look at like the number of fats that they're having throughout the day or how close they're having them to their workout. But in a photo food journal sense, I might not be able to tell that they had that much fat in a meal because you can't see oil on vegetables, right? But you can see like roasted vegetables will usually have a few higher calories because of higher fat. Or if people put butter on their food, they'll log butter, but they won't like take a picture and then be like, this is buttered potatoes. So I don't necessarily see that. So I
Mhm.
would say that there's some definitely elements of macro tracking that make it much easier for the teaching part to happen, because then you understand the why. It's like you're feeling hungry because your fats are really low, but you didn't feel hungry on this day because your fats were higher. So let's try to match the fats or something like that. That would be just
Yeah.
that was an example off the top of my head.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think like macro tracking, things like that, for somebody with like an eating disorder past or feels like that those things could trigger from tracking. Like
Mhm.
you probably shouldn't be worrying about tracking at all. You know, tracking like concrete numbers like a calorie tracker or something like that. But for people who don't have that kind of past, I think it can be really beneficial as far as just learning more about the composition of foods. I know that was one
Truth.
way that I learned dramatically, you know, the different compositions of foods, like how many carbs were in this, what is a high fiber food. Like, yeah, you can look up lists online, but when you're actually eating those foods and putting them, like logging them in, it just clicks way more easier because you're actually implementing those. So I definitely think even for somebody who doesn't plan to do it, you know, for the rest of their life or for a long period of time, I think it can be a huge learning tool, even for, you know, a few days or a week or so, to just learn more about their habits and learn more about the composition of what they're actually eating.
Oh yeah, honestly, like sometimes my favorite clients are the ones that like no nutrition knowledge, no nutrition background, never tracked a thing, and I'm like, yes, because now I can teach you, and you come from a blank slate, not one that's maybe been like inflicted with diet culture or some other like predisposed thoughts about food and nutrition. This is just, oh, sure, I'll download this app, sure, I'll plug in my food, no big deal.
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. And I really liked how you talked about some of the clients too that you've had and they've tracked macros and they go on afterwards and they don't necessarily track all the time, but maybe, you know, a couple of days out of the week they do. And I think like everyone almost can get to that point to where they maybe don't have to track all of the time, but maybe like one day a week or 2 days a week they do. And it's just kind of like a self audit to make sure you're still kind of getting the nutrients that you need in. And
Yes.
then you go back to what your normal intake is the rest of the days of the week, and you kind of just imitate those patterns that you developed from tracking. Like myself, I don't even track every single day, and like I would say I'm kind of fairly new. I don't know, I started tracking around like 2013, so maybe that's not new, maybe 6 or 7 years, but um like I hopefully have a lot of life ahead of me still, and I feel like I can just not track a certain day, but I've learned so much from food, from tracking, and then obviously my nutrition courses, but that I can develop a meal that has, you know, the amount of grams of protein that I probably need for a meal. And then I can just do that maybe 3, 4 to 5 meals per day and listen to kind of how my hunger cues are going and just know I'm kind of, you know, around the intake that I need. And without that previous experience of tracking, I don't think I would be at this point that I am right now, at least as fast. Maybe, you know, a few years down the road, I would get there. But yeah, I think it's a super useful tool for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that exactly. What you did was you took an audit, right? Or you started to make meals based on your nutrition needs as dietitians. That's what we're really good at, like tube feeding,
Yeah.
right? What is tube feeding if not macro counting? Anyway, oh, opening me up. um, and then so repeated habits will last. So then you get to be intuitive. I think that's like a piece that's kind of missing from this whole. There's clearly a divide in dietetics, right? I feel
Yeah.
like people are like pro macro tracking or pro intuitive eating, and if you're not pro intuitive eating, you're pro. No, we won't get there. Maybe another episode. But um, to me, if you can learn how to track your nutritional intake and look at it and study it and learn what makes you feel good, then you're going to be a bomb ass intuitive eater if that's what
Hmm.
your ultimate goal is. But how do you just start being intuitive when I mean, everything in the world tells us, like, our external environment is constantly giving us feedback on how to behave. Like, there's reasons why there's commercials. It's to get us to behave a certain way. How do you be intuitive if you've never had that, like, piece where you have control over, and you could be like, oh, so 4 ounces of chicken looks like this and it makes me feel like that? Cool. Okay. Next time I'm going to, be at a buffet or a family dinner, I'm going to serve myself chicken because I like it. And I know that this is about what my body needs and it feels good. I mean, that's awesome. I think that that's a very useful skill as a human.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my gosh. I agree 100% on all that. I think it's like you have this piece where you're tracking and you have this numerical data. Okay. And then you have this kind of, I guess, subjective, but somewhat objective where you look at what the food actually looks like the portion size. And then you have subjective of like how full you feel. And
mhm.
for people who are so new to it, I think tracking, having that quantitative number, it's helpful to connect that with how full you feel. And then as you get more experience with seeing, what like a 4-ounce chicken breast looks like, then you are better at looking at that portion size and then connecting that portion size to how you feel too. And I think going straight into intuitive eating without any background knowledge at all is extremely difficult. Not saying it's impossible, but it's extremely difficult because of, like you said, the external environment, commercials, and then all of the highly processed foods that so many people eat, which, they don't fill us up like unprocessed foods would. And they're, generally lower in protein, higher in sugar, higher in fat, higher in sodium. And all of those things make us eat more than what we should and feel less full than we should. So I don't know, it's just very hard to be intuitive in that kind of environment without having actual objective knowledge of food backing it up, I guess, in the background. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Side note, there was this really cool podcast that I listened to. I believe it was on the Iron Culture podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Um, Eric Helms and Omar Isuf, they are the two co-hosts of that. And I believe they had, gosh, I feel really terrible because I can't remember her name, but it was,
It's okay.
yeah, I feel really terrible because it was a really cool podcast. But they had her as a guest, and they talked about kind of intuitive eating with training with like RPE. I don't know how knowledgeable you are on far as using like powerlifting training style with RPE, but basically RPE is more of an intuitive style of training where you use a certain load for a certain amount of reps based off of how you're feeling that day. When like percentage based training would be you have 75% of your squat max and you do that for 4 sets of 8 or something. And
Mhm.
they kind of had a conversation using that as an analogy of you start out doing more percentage based, but then as you get more experience of what that percentage feels like, then you kind of go into more of RPE based training because you have that experience of what 75% kind of feels like. And
Mhm.
it reminded me a lot of the intuitive eating conversation where when you get the numerical data down first, then you have an idea of what that kind of feels like. And then you transition to intuitive eating. So,
Yeah. And I think that I'm definitely going to check out that podcast because it is very similar to the way I look at nutrition. And also the reason why when you enter the field of dietetics or even take a basic like science 123 course on nutrition in college, you keep a food journal so you can see what food provides for your body, and then you get into the more advanced things. And I think that that's why you start with the basics, and numbers are typically easy for people to just be like, oh, okay, I got it, if you have the right coach. Now I think that that goes way farther than just going online, tracking, getting a macro app and then following those macros blindly, no coach, and then just trying to follow suit. I think the coaching piece is huge because then you can like have that subjective conversation, talk about those things like, "Oh, I didn't feel really good. Why is that?" Or like,
yeah.
hey, I kind of was afraid to eat more because it turned red on my app. I had that conversation a lot. That's one thing I will say is kind of annoying with trackers is that a lot of them are designed for weight loss or weight gain,
Mhm.
when I like to just sometimes be like, no, this is just awareness of what you're eating. Um, but I at least can tell them, oh, okay, so since that redness is triggering you, well, let's get rid of the redness. Let's bump up your calorie goal to 4,000. You'll never see red again. Like,
Yeah.
and they wouldn't be able to get that feedback from me if they weren't having that coaching conversation. So I do think that you should be, if you're gonna set out to learn the basics of nutrition, start tracking. That's funny. Then do it with a coach by your side who can like
Yeah.
have that banter with you for sure.
Yeah, I definitely think that's so important. And I think like another example randomly is just like tracking things like spinach. Like like I remember, I don't know, I was having a conversation with somebody and I think they asked something about tracking spinach and I was like, literally you can just completely eyeball it and it's not going to make any difference. Like if you're measuring oil, like you can just talk to them more about things that they would probably want to be a little more precise with versus things that they can literally just eyeball and not even think twice about it and probably not even like think about the portion size and just throw it in. Like you're going to eat 10 cups of spinach, you might get what, like 30 calories or something. I don't know, something weird like that. But like
Mhm.
oil, obviously it's more calorie dense and you want to be a little more exact with that. And I think just having someone like a coach, a dietitian who has experience with that and they can help guide you through those little loopholes that just make the process a little easier.
And yep, just so that way it doesn't feel like a barrier to your nutrition. I will say the other reason why I do have people track is because I like to study micronutrients a ton, because so many people, will do the macro tracking and do calorie counting, but if they're not seeing that their iron is chronically low, well, there's probably a reason why you haven't been feeling good despite you're eating carbs. Because that's another thing. People will try and say, I'm eating carbs and I don't feel good. Well, hello, it's because your iron is non existent. You don't have the right micros to make those macros count.
Hmm.
How would I have been able to find that in a non tracking method? I guess talking about how you feel, but I don't know. I will like macros forever. Macros are my
Yeah,
favorite.
I think that could bring up another conversation. We'll probably not talk about this now because that would probably take forever. But the difference between like a nutritionist and a dietitian, because a nutritionist might not think to pick up on those kinds of things, like your iron being low and that being why your energy levels are low. Um, but so that was a really long kind of ramble there about that topic, but I think it was really good. Um, so what are the struggles that you see with more advanced people? Because we kind of covered the beginners. So more advanced people, I would say maybe not your professional athlete level, but people who have, I guess, been in the gym, training, tracking for maybe a few years now.
So, been in it at that like elite competitive sports level. What's their biggest struggle? I would say I probably do get a little bit more of that type A person there who could be maybe showing signs of just too rigid, but I like I said, the coaching conversation makes a very big difference in that person's journey. But the other struggle I would say is just reading those calorie and meeting their nutrition needs. It
Mhm.
honestly is hard for people to get up to their levels, not for any like, I don't want to, I'm scared kind of reason, but just like, damn, my body needs that much fuel. And I have a lot of entrepreneurs too. So I would say like those people are like running their business and they are just as dedicated about their health and well-being. So time is a struggle for them. It really is. But if that's what you meant by struggles, like what are
Oh
their
yeah, definitely.
most struggles? Okay, yeah. It's time spent dedicating their nutrition to meet their needs, and then just the sheer volume that they had to reach to sometimes meet their needs. Um, I would say are the bigger struggles because they're burning a ton of calories, and there's temptations when you have a higher calorie more nutrition needs. It's easy to be like, oh cool, I'll just have an extra margarita, that'll get me there.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, but you want those calories to like be providing those micronutrients, that nutrient density. So I would say that that's another struggle for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. So going on that, I'm going to provide you or the audience with a not so great example and a not so optimal way to approach that situation. So about a year ago, I was doing probably like my biggest bulk or longest bulk that I had so far, and I got to like my heaviest weight that I've ever been. Just trying to put some weight on, build some muscle, and I was eating like 4,200 to 4,400 calories a day. Um, and like I was in college, walking around all day, so I was getting a lot of steps into, and I just didn't have the time to eat as much as I did, as much as I should have. So some days I'd come home and it's like 7 at night and I have like over 2,000 calories left to eat, sometimes close to 3,000. And I would just order a large pizza and just eat the whole entire thing. And yeah, definitely not the best practice. Definitely do not recommend doing that. 100% don't do that. I should probably just cut that part out right now. But
you're human though, and
yeah,
like you knew you needed to meet your nutrition needs. You had a goal, so you were trying to do it in a way that was like feasible for you. You also said you were like coming home at night, so you had a long, busy day. That's a real struggle for a lot of people to like who want to take their nutrition seriously because they do have a goal and they know it's important. But there's temptations. It's so easy to have. Oh, I gotta eat a pizza. Damn.
yeah, definitely. And it's like I don't even have to cook it. Just call someone up, order it. But that only happened maybe once a month, a couple of times. So it wasn't something every day. I wasn't doing that. But what would be kind of your advice for somebody who is struggling to get enough calories in the day? Like what are some just a few easy tips that you would say?
Well, a very easy tip, I think, is just eat bigger portions of what you're currently having. So if you're doing one tablespoon of blank or one spoon of blank, have 2 spoons of blank. That if some people, that's a very easy, like, okay, like I don't have to think of another meal because that's hard. The other thing I want to mention is that's why supplements exist for the sports nutrition field. It's because it's hard for athletes to get their nutrition needs just from a lot of whole foods. They're traveling a lot, they're training hard. They have to have that number of calories, but if they only have like a rest, like a 1 hour rest between their next session, like those calories can't just be like a big chicken salad with like whole wheat pasta. I'd love for them to eat that post workout, but like if you got 2 hours between training sessions, that thing is not going to digest. So we need probably liquid calories. So that's probably like a staple food in all of my upper athletes nutrition plans is like a fat smoothie. Like just getting those good calories. I build it for them based on foods that they have. So that way I want to take as much thought out of it as possible, but they still have to like learn how they can do it on their own. So I'll build them smoothie recipes, omelet recipes. Omelets are good to pack in calories, good clean calories, because you can usually load those up with like, like more lean proteins. You can add more like healthier fats like avocados. So that's my recommendation is doing very easy formulas, but just packing in like high nutrient density foods. But this is a fun conversation because I'll share a number with you, but on average, like let's say somebody who's, like of an elite athlete status, hard exercise and sports, 4,373 calories a day while maintaining a busy schedule, while traveling, while it's hard. So you need to, come up with like easy strategies for people, and one, portion sizes, two, liquid meals, honestly, and then like using good NSF certified supplements because that is why they're there. That's why the entire industry came to be for athletes.
Yeah. Those are great tips. I think the supplement thing is something that doesn't get talked about enough because there's this huge push with nutrition professionals to kind of, I feel like, steer away from supplements. But I think in that context, like they can be great for some people. Another thing that I would always do too, random, but I would carry around like a jar of natural peanut butter with me and just have like a spoonful like every couple of hours or something. And
It's like a
it helped.
great ratio.
Yeah.
That's got like what, 6 grams of protein, 8 grams of fat, and 7 grams of carbs, or some. I may have jumbled up those numbers. Somebody fact check me, but
Yeah.
it's a great ratio. And yeah, you can easily put peanut butter in a smoothie. I love peanut butter with really anything. So I would have no problem. That's a good tip. I used to keep
Yeah.
peanut butter jar in my car.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to say, because you brought up supplements being kind of like a taboo-ish topic in our field, 100%. I used to be afraid, like this was like in 2017,
Mhm.
of like sharing a protein smoothie. Like protein is a part of my life every day, once a day, maybe even twice a day.
Yeah.
And I used to be afraid to talk about like my protein supplements. I don't care at all. But yeah, you're right. It is a real thing. So funny. So
Yeah,
funny to
it is. Unfortunately. Um, so last thing I kind of want to just ask you just briefly, like, so what advice would you give to someone during this time, during the coronavirus time on their
mm.
nutrition? Because I've seen a lot of posts about this, um, going into how to boost your immune system, things like that. And I believe you made a decently long video on, I don't know if you posted it on Instagram TV or somewhere around there. Um, but I know that it had some really good points in there as far as like how to deal with this situation. So if you could just kind of summarize
Oh,
that or your advice.
was it my coronavirus video or like
Yeah.
the COVID-19 nutrition tips?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't know if you're talking about the anti-inflammatory video. However, the COVID-19 situation for right now, I think that the best thing somebody can do is, well, number one, we're all under orders to stay home, right? So try to limit your times going grocery shopping. So in terms of your nutrition, I say become a baller at being your own kitchen manager and take inventory of what you have in your kitchen. This is more behavioral nutrition tips, not like specific eat these foods to stay healthy. I can talk about that though. But yeah, just understand what you have in your kitchen. If it's a lot, cool. Let's make a list. What are your carbohydrate sources? What are your protein sources, your fats, your proteins, your veggies, and meal plan from there. If you don't know how to do that, well, there's a ton of registered dietitians that have a virtual nutrition coaching practice. They would love to help you. So I would just say step number one, get your inventory down. That way you can plan meals that are balanced and then limit your time having to go to the grocery store, because that really is the best way to handle this situation for yourself, to keep yourself safe and to keep everybody else safe. There's that hashtag flatten the curve. That's a big deal. So staying home is going to be the most important thing we can do. I also think that when it comes to buying food, we have options. We can go to the grocery store, but I think that if you take inventory and meal plan, you'll have a very short list. So that's good. It'll keep you in and out fairly fast. Um, but I think that the delivery services are a good way to go if you can afford the little extra boost. Like Instacart is a good example. The other thing is too, meal delivery kits. If you use like Sunbasket, that's a good way to get food that's pre-portioned for you, that comes with directions. Again, a little bit more of a pricey option, but sometimes we might have that affordability if we're cutting other expenses because we're not going out and drinking or going out and shopping. The other thing is too is that there's a lot of really awesome meal prep companies, some that are small business owners themselves and are putting out like really good, deals and meals that are affordable for people, that again, portion controlled, nice and healthy and balanced. Restaurant owners are doing things. So I think that those are the behavioral things that we could do better at right now during this time is taking inventory of what we have, being really realistic about what you actually need. And then I came up with this little chop-a-thon thing last week where I had registered dietitians share on their Instagram stories quick and easy meals that are made with just basic ingredients that you might have on hand, or just like a mishmash of things. Because I think that's a skill to be able to put that kind of meal together and it tastes good. But the more you see it, the more you practice it, the better you'll get. I'm actually going to come out with that recipe booklet soon, and so are the other registered dietitians. So whoever is listening to this podcast, whenever, maybe look up the hashtag Chopathon and you'll see it. That I think is going to be helpful. And then I would say that those are probably the biggest behavioral tips that I could give for a time like this.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I think those are tips that are great to use even with not during this time, like to save
Especially.
the amount of money that you spend on groceries, because we all buy groceries and we end up cooking what we think, everything that we can with it, and end up tossing a lot of it out, or a lot of it sits back in there for months and doesn't get used. So I think that's actually a really good strategy you could use maybe like once every couple of weeks, once every month, and use up all this extra stuff that you bought that you haven't used yet.
Yeah, you can get really creative too. And it's funny because like taking inventory, I guess, is just like a fun to do thing for me. So somebody probably listening to this could easily be like, I'm not going to take inventory of what I have.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money in your cabinet. I remember learning that in food service. And my preceptor was like, you see this? This is money. And I was like, oh, I guess that's a good way to look at that. So good behavioral strategy for this time, especially. And then just, yeah, like you said, in general.
Yeah. So are there any specific, I guess, food choices that you would recommend to kind of boost your immunity or anything like that? Because I know a lot of that's going around, and I don't know if I kind of touched on it on a previous podcast, but like my opinion on it. But I'm just curious to see, if there are any strategies that you kind of recommend people do.
Ooh, hopefully we don't have differing opinions,
Oh
but
boy.
okay, so nutrient density is a huge topic for me. So when we talk about food, instead of like, I avoid good and bad, but I do talk about calorie density and nutrient density. So choosing foods that are super high in nutrients are going to be your best defense and support a healthy immune system. So if I was going to pinpoint a couple of foods, I would say foods that are really high in vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, protein. I think protein is going to be an easy thing for people to get, but because our B cells and our T cells are legit made of protein, we need to have enough protein in our diets to build those cells. Vitamin C is really easy to get with red bell peppers, strawberries, leafy greens like spinach. It's high in vitamin C. And then zinc is also important, but and I've seen a lot of like multi-level marketing things come out like about zinc. You can get a toxicity from zinc pretty easily, or not easily, but like don't overdo that. If anyone's listening and there's like, oh, I'm going to supplement with zinc. Don't overdo it. You can actually like lose your sense of smell, which coincidentally is one of the signs of coronavirus. Some people are like lose their sense of smell. So like careful with your like self-dosing supplement medication situation. And if you lose your sense of smell, you might not know why. But why I brought up zinc is because it is effective in, again, your immune system. I love oysters for zinc. If anyone is like surprised by that answer, you haven't been following me because I talk about oysters all the time. But yeah, those would be my go-tos. And one more food that I think is super nutrient dense is hemp seeds. I can't talk enough about those because they have a ton of vitamins, a ton of minerals, omega-3 fatty acids. So that would be like my little list of foods that are nutrient dense, dense in the nutrients that help support a healthy immune system and are fairly easy to find. Like, I mean, trust me, the smoked oysters are stocked in your stores. Those have not gone anywhere.
Yeah, probably not.
But yeah, so those would be my tips, my food tips.
Yeah, now they're all going to be sold out now after this one.
You're welcome, Crown Prince.
Yeah. No, those are great. Yeah, I mean, what I mentioned in the podcast before was that I think a lot of people just have unrealistic expectations on how much of an impact that stuff will make. Like, I think it'll make a great impact on your symptoms and everything, but it's not going to like automatically not make you get the virus. It's not something, I don't know. I think it's being promoted by the supplement companies that you mentioned, the multi-level marketing companies, that it's something that you need in order to not get it. And I think probably the best way to not get it is to just go with the behavioral things that you mentioned before, with not going out to the grocery store as often.
Yeah, that really is like it's funny. It's like all of the top official people who are like super duper knowledgeable about this, that's what they're telling us to do. That's what we got to do. Like they're telling us the answer. We can just, cheat this test and stay home. Definitely still eat healthy to
Yeah.
keep yourself healthy. I think a lot of people are also coming down with some stress related symptoms.
Yeah.
Like there's stress, not sleeping well, and then they're maybe eating poorly, but then they're just catching something else. And then, so the more you can stay hydrated, eat nutrient dense foods, and stay home, that's a good mix. That's the best thing that we can do, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So where can people find you on social media, or if you have a website or anything like that? Like, where are you most active? Where can people get in touch with you if they're interested in your services?
And my website is the best place to learn more about all of my nutrition programs and also just to learn from me because as much as I love Instagram, which you can find me at Denver Fitness Dietitian, I can't upload the amount of content on Instagram that I can to my website. So mindonnutrition.com is where I upload most of those materials. It's also where people can sign up for my newsletter, Nutrition Gym. It's still in its infancy, but it is ready to be subscribed to. And that's where I will be sharing a lot of my nutrition education videos. When I do like brand sponsored content, I usually do videos with them and it's all nutrition education. A lot of the guides that I spend making are going to be on my website or on my newsletter, Nutrition Gym. So definitely mindonnutrition.com, Instagram at Denver Fitness Dietitian, and then sign up for my newsletter, Nutrition Gym. Those are my 3 go-tos.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for coming on here. It was a really cool conversation, and it was cool to, I don't know, you work with a very wide variety of people, and it's really interesting to learn about the approaches you take depending on the individual. And you do a lot of things too. Like you've done, I don't know, TV things.
Yeah.
You put a lot of products out there too, which I think is cool, like guides and things like that. I don't know. You just do a lot, so it was cool to have you on here. So.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I'm happy to help. Dietetic interns are probably my favorite people in the world because I know what you're going through and I know you're so ready to just take the test. So I'm happy to help. And then also this is really fun. So thank you for having me.
All right, cool. So I'm sure I'll have you on in the future, but yeah, we're going to have to just wrap it up here. But thanks again. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.